Welcome to Nonprofit Nerd Impact Unleashed. Get ready to dive into the world of nonprofit leadership and sustainability, where the passion and unstoppable dedication of those making a real impact are celebrated. With your host, Jarrett Ransom, get ready to explore inspiring stories and game changing strategies of nonprofit leaders from across the sector. In this season, we're focusing on critical management challenges that are key to the long-term success of nonprofit organizations. Nonprofit Nerd Impact Unleashed is your go-to podcast for no-nonsense, in-depth conversations with the real-life superheroes of the nonprofit sector. Get ready to unleash your inner nerdiness and learn how to navigate and overcome the challenges that help build stronger, more sustainable organizations. Now, let's dive in and harness the collective power of our nonprofit networks to create lasting change.
Well, hey there, friends. Welcome back. And I'm thrilled we have another nonprofit nerd with me. And don't worry, Thom, that is a compliment. It's always meant to be a compliment. I almost said a compliment, which could be a whole new vernacular for you. But welcome, Thom Dancy. Thrilled to have you join me today. And I'm really happy to have our listeners learn more about you. So welcome.
Thank you so much, Jarrett. It's a pleasure to be here. And like you said, nerding out on for nonprofit is my favorite thing. So I'm ready to dive in.
Well, let's dive in. And I always like to say, for those of you that might be watching this as opposed to only listening to it, anytime like nerd is brought up, I like to push my glasses up just a little bit further on the nose, the bridge of my nose, right? It's like right on cue. Let's just get super nerdy. But to start us off, Thom, would you give us some background, share a little bit about the role you play in the space, the nonprofit space, of course, and what is it that you do in this phenomenal sector?
Oh my gosh. Well, currently I am the executive director of the Ririe-Woodbury Dance Company in Salt Lake City. And I've been associated with the company now for the past 2 years. So I feel like I'm, for those of y'all that work in the executive space, I'm starting to get my sea legs under me, which is great. Before then, I've played executive director. I've been an outreach coordinator. I've played social media and marketing manager. And I've worked primarily in the performing arts space because my background is in performing arts. I started my adult life as a professional dancer, did the work of working for ballet and contemporary dance companies as an artist for many years. And I think like a lot of us that find ourselves in the nonprofit space, there's something that we're really passionate about. It's a calling and it intersects with something that we find ourselves really good at, which for me was administration. And so when I was leaving the world of dance, because dancers retire very young, I was considering what I wanted to do. And I had always done a little bit of part-time work, frazzled director comes in, it's like, I have to figure out how to write this grant in 3 days. And I would say, oh, like, I don't know how to do that, but I'm sure I can figure it out over a weekend and I'll get back to you. And that kind of led, I think, to this appreciation for people that Google concepts and figure things out, because I think our industry is about figuring stuff out and managing crisis and staying calm and collected through it. So it's, been a really, really fun journey. And I'm excited to have really experienced, I guess, the past 20 odd years in my industry. So, it's something that I care deeply about, and I'm always happy to chat about, Jarrett.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, so good already. And I was doing executive coaching with a client, and she said, I really need your help because I have been Googling my way through my day-to-day tasks, right? So I love that you called that out also, Thom. I also say, like, yes, I call myself the nonprofit nerd. I did not go to school for this, right? And I say that I am of an age, perhaps, where like nonprofit management was not a degree. It was not an option. So I've like, maybe it was, and I was just unaware, but I've really learned through battle scars.
It's such a thing, I think, and I had a couple of really resilient executive directors that I think mentored me when I was coming into this role. And, I think it's a very common theme of like the buck stops with someone has to figure it out. And that organizational resilience kind of starts and stops with executive leadership. And so how do I project that? How do I maintain that? But yeah, we're conducting staff interviews right now for a really important position in our organization, for artistic director. So hopefully by the time this premieres, you'll be able to see the new AD on our website. But I'm loving hearing people that come in and talk about that org resilience, because you just know that you're bringing on a fighter, and that's often what these roles need.
What we need. I'm curious, how do you define that? How do you define organizational resilience, especially in the performing arts?
This is such a good question. And it's, thank you for sending me a couple of these ahead of time. It gave me a chance to kind of ruminate on it. And, I think I kind of came up with three thoughts: that organizational resilience is the art of the pivot. I think we get very, very focused in how things have been done. This is the way this is done. And we don't leave ourselves open to the opportunity of pivoting, especially in times of crisis management and times where things don't work out. Like we can't always stick to the same road. We have to think broadly and openly and collaboratively with our team. Another two, and I'll just lay these out so we can dive in. I think organizational resilience is setting ego aside. Just because something worked for you 5 years ago doesn't mean it's going to work now. And it's really being open and honest with yourself. And organizations are different. I worked places where maybe this one tactic has worked really well because of the stakeholders that were a part of that organization, and it's not worked elsewhere. And so you have to kind of let go of your own ego and adapt. And I would say a big piece of all this, and it's something that I always strive for in my own work, is to really build and motivate and inspire an active board of trustees or board of directors. I'm always getting reminded that it starts at the very top. And as an executive, my job is to manage up and help lead this incredible group of people that inspire an org. And without that group really being invested in the mission, it's really hard to get things going. And so, I've been really blessed to have active boards in my life, but really maintaining and growing that, I think, is a big part of what we're talking about. Sorry, that was a lot. But like I said,
It was a lot of goodness. And I just want to call out, and this is my perspective. I have seen that, we can go back to March of 2020. I think we all remember what happened then, although we are years beyond that in some way, shape, or form. The arts gets hit a lot, right? I feel that the arts really gets hit in ways of, well, it's not basic needs, right? We don't need art to live out our basic needs, right? And so how do you address that? What is your leadership style of how you navigate challenges like that? And I feel I have not dedicated my career specifically to the art space. I have had the privilege and honor to work with some arts aligned missions. But unlike you, I haven't lived in this space for my 20 plus years, right, of being in the career. So tell me, how do you navigate that? What is your leadership style to navigate those challenges like that? Because those are huge funding setbacks.
Oh, it's definitely a challenge. And I agree. I do think that the art space often, gets pushed aside by a lot of funders. It's definitely not something as accessible maybe as things within the humanities space in our industry. But, as someone who's, worked in this industry for a while, I would actually argue that art is a basic need. And I think about, I think we think about performing art, right? And maybe ballet isn't of your interest. Maybe going to the Museum of Contemporary Art isn't of your interest, but you still might listen to Rihanna on Spotify, and you still might take your kids to a really amazing mural exhibit downtown just to get them to be outdoors and experiencing a bit of culture. There's so many avenues of connection to the arts that we kind of don't think about in our day-to-day life. And it's one of those things that's statistically proven to enhance education if it's involved in a K through 12 setting. And so, and like, I encourage everyone listening to this, go and look at those facts, like think through that, talk to your representatives about arts and arts education, because it is really vital in that space for creating a well-rounded student. But as far as leading within that space, I think there are probably so many ways to lead, right? And so many ways to make things happen. I like to think of myself as a very referent and collaborative leader. I'm a huge fan of taking in, a lot of advice from people. I'm trying to intentionally hire people that have skill sets that I lack, and I want to listen to that feedback. The same way with board members. I really want to hear different perspectives, and sometimes it comes from the most magical and amazing of places. I mean, our board chair at Ririe-Woodbury is an environmental consultant, and we were sitting down and she had this great idea for where in the city to place an arts education program that we hadn't thought of yet. And she was thinking very clearly about the demographic and where it should be. And it was like, oh my gosh, no one has mentioned this yet. And it was amazing that it came from, an avid supporter, but someone who's not involved in the day-to-day operation and not an artist herself, but an extremely intelligent and amazing human. I really think about accountability a lot, both personal accountability on my team, how I motivate and manage. But, I really think maybe the biggest things that I think about are, I seek advice. I want to look at the cultural map. I want to understand and assess the movement that we can make. I want to take so much in that I can really make a really clear decision. And then when I make a decision, I want to be really decisive about it. I want to make mental room in case we got to pivot, but I want to make the decision and I want to go. And since we're on a podcast, I'm always listening and researching and learning. One of my favorite people to listen to right now is Simon Sinek, and he has a lot of great podcasts on leadership. And he actually talks about making decisions and pulling from organizations like the Marines. And he talks about that decision-making process and how it's very, take in all the data you can, but at a certain point you have to make the decision and you have to go with it. And I just thought that that was so deeply inspiring. So now I kind of pull that into what I do on my day-to-day.
Yeah. I love that you mentioned Simon Sinek. What a leader. Talk about leadership, right? Like that is someone that I have gone to several times. I also want to call out what you said, like, and I appreciate this, your disruptive thinking of, I would push back and say art is part of what we need. Art heals, right? And you're right. Like how many times do we go to music as an art form for whatever it is we're feeling, right? And I mean, I think we can all relate to, we have likely all gone through a personal breakup. Like, what is that music that you jam out to get your confidence back, right? Like,
Exactly.
what is it that you go to? You're right, the muralist and the installations, and there's so much within art that does provide healing from that place of conflict, that place of, transition. And I love some of those examples you shared, Thom. And I'm really curious, like, how have you found the ability in your leadership style, right, to guide these performing arts organizations in finding balance? Because we need to balance the financial sustainability with also investing in artistic and administrative development for our staff. What does your leadership style do to really provide that in the balancing mechanisms?
Oh my gosh. I mean, so many things. And I'll say for myself, I think leadership as I am learning it is this constantly evolving and learning thing. And as I talk to people in our industry who have been leaders for many, many, many years, they'll say the same thing. I inherited this role from we're taking the organization right now from being founder led to founder inspired and kind of examining all the steps that go through that really delicate transition to make that happen. And it really is a delicate transition that requires so much thoughtful movement and so many, careful procedures. And I inherited the role from the founder's daughter. And, Jenna Woodbury is probably maybe 30 years my senior, 20 years my senior. And she left me this really beautiful note. And I kind of think now in any executive transition, like leave your successor a note, like explain the field, let them know what they're going to inherit. And she left me this great note about learning and constantly evolving. And she was like, I was always learning, I was always transitioning and finding new information. And maybe that's actually the key to all of it, is saying, I'm not done learning. The things that are working today, right now in leadership, may not be the things that work in 5 years, in 10 years. And I think, we talk a lot right now. I think in our industry, what I love is how we're shifting to a really transparent model in leadership and a very collaborative model. I think, a lot of that is, employees really wanting more of that in the space. You're trying to build trust and engender trust and get people to really sign on to the vision that you have. And I would say that transparency piece is it's so key. I was so grateful to see that from my predecessor, and I'm just trying to embody that in myself. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that yourself, Jarrett, of like transparency within a leadership space.
I have a lot of thoughts on that. And yeah, and I will say, like, maybe this is a brag. I think it's a little bit of a brag, and I don't mean for it to be braggadocious, but just like an honor. I feel honored. There was a student working through his doctorate program, found me on LinkedIn, and his thesis was around authentic leadership. And I was just like, wowed that he found me. He asked me, to be part of his thesis and the interview. And so to me, authentic leadership embodies transparency, right? And so that builds into it. And when I say transparency, for me, it is who I am as a person and who I am professionally, and blending those two together, as that. And you said this, right? Like, we don't know all the answers, and we are constantly learning. And for me, that is how I want to lead. That is how I have had rapport and galvanized the trust, even if, because I come in as an interim executive director. Oftentimes that's a big service line for me. So that means there's transition within the organization. It also means that, the team or the stakeholders aren't 100% bought into whatever we are going to do to move forward. And that's okay. But hopefully, with my transparent and authentic leadership, I can get them on board, even if they don't agree, right? Like, we can build that trust and respect and rapport regardless of their personal business decision. And I love that. So yeah, I appreciate you asking, because I don't always get to share from that perspective. And I'm a huge proponent for that. I love how LinkedIn as a platform has also become a little bit more authentic, a little bit more transparent. And for me, I think that's how we show up. Like, we need to show up real, and we need to be real to ourselves and to those teams that we're leading.
I love that. And I guess this is getting a little tangential, but so much of my own research and thought right now is that, that Venn diagram of like management and leadership, and like where it crosses and what is different. And the leadership difference is really that inspirational piece. And that inspirational piece comes from, like you said, genuine transparency. And we can't be transparent about everything, and I'm always clear with my team about that, of like, I'm going to be transparent with you to the limit that I can be. And I hope that you understand that, you hear that. But I love what you just said about being your authentic self and showing up. I have thought so much about, myself as a queer person in this space, like a member of the LGBT community, and like, what are my values within that space? And so how do I transition that into my values as a leader? What are my values as a partner? What are my values, like romantically, like what are my values within a relationship? And how does that transition to a space where I have a relationship now with 13 other people on this team? What are my values as, just a community person and how I want to treat others? And I think, you talked about showing up, and that was a piece of advice that I got really, really early on in my career. Once I transitioned fully into the nonprofit space, from a woman in San Diego. And she was just like, the most powerful thing you can do is show up. And I think about that all the time, that, for a lot of dance companies and a lot of performing arts organizations, and it's probably the same way in the humanities and social sectors, we are very much like these pillars for this arts community that we represent. And so it's actually really important that I show up. Tomorrow, I'm going to a film screening. We have a dance film that's being presented with a lot of local artists. And so I want to be there. I want to be interacting with people. Saturday, a couple of us in the dance community are seeing a big show in South Salt Lake, led by another dance organization. And I think being a part of those spaces and interacting genuinely, appreciatively, it's super important. This is not a job that exists in silo. You are a community leader, and so you have to be in that space leading.
Yes. Oh, showing up is big, being there. And I love what I'm hearing from what you're saying, Thom, is also the camaraderie and the collaboration that you're building, whether it's intentional or if it's timely. It's like having these reciprocal relationships that benefit the greater community. You never know when the opportunity to collaborate in a bigger way, when that invitation comes along, you've already built the relationships, also the trust, also the rapport, right? To say, hey, competitive dance company, whatever, it might be. And whether it's in Salt Lake or whether it's, somewhere else, it's like, hey, might we come together and explore this opportunity? Whereas if we work in a silo, as you said, we would, one, ego would be there, right? Ego and silo, I think, happens together. I don't know the best word for that right now, but anyway, like I do think that happens when we are working in a silo, right? We are working outside of collaboration, and that is not good for our sector or a community at large.
Well, and like you said, you never know what opportunities are going to appear from that, who you're going to meet. I think, one of our jobs as leaders in this space is to think strategically. And so it always helps me to understand, the lay of the land, who is doing what in our space. And even if we're not interacting right now, for me to understand that, to appreciate it, because there might be a moment where that collaboration really does exist. And when it becomes a possibility, I really want to jump at it, without question. I want to know that this is the answer. I think a great example of that from my own career, when I was in San Diego, my first executive job was with a group called the Rosenbach's Project, and really amazing group. And I came in, and they had an amazing initial donor base. They had great ticket sales, but we started thinking through all these ways to expand the company from its initial budget. And the artistic director had really big dreams. And I was like, I think that if we treat this step by step, we can really get there. And so much of that practice, over 4 years, we built that organization from a 30K to a 500K budget. And in those 4 years, so much of that was just thinking through the relationships that we're building. And, we had a board member's husband come in one day, and he and I had known each other for years in the community. We had served on a couple of committees together, and he's a resident of Chula Vista, which is a really amazing, diverse community in Southern California. And he was like, I'm on one of the commissions right now for the city of Chula Vista, and I want you to know that this money in this other committee is going to become available in short, tenure, and it's for bringing arts and culture work into the public libraries of Chula Vista. And I want to, I want to just give this to you as a thought. And it was just like the next day, I was like, you know what? Introduce me to whoever you need to introduce me to. Let's have this conversation. I knew that the programming that we had could be packaged to be performed in these library settings. And so we just had this really gorgeous conversation of like, look, we're already doing this. We'd love to connect it to the city of Chula Vista. And I think now it's created like a 3-year funding relationship with the company of like bringing this art into the public library space. And that was just a matter of, again, you never know who's going to come up to you at an event and be like, have you thought about this? And then it's, how do you make sure that you're ready to really pursue that? I don't know. There's so many avenues here. It's a fun sector.
Yes. So many avenues. Right now, we have a leader in the Metro Phoenix community, female leader that has really galvanized the support of like-minded organizations. And so she could have taken it into a competitive space. Instead, she's embraced it and embodied it in a collaborative space. I would say 30 plus organizations, myself included, because I'm serving as an interim ED for this organization. And the length that this woman has gone to, right? Like, she will reserve a full table at her gala and fill it with like-minded, representatives from these seemingly competitive organizations, but they're not competitive because she has a collaborative consciousness about her, right? And so I think when we can see it in that way, and that example that you just shared is a prime example of what we can do when we show up and we're present and we're open to these opportunities.
I love that. And I love I love that they're leaders thinking through those kind of scenarios and all these spaces.
Yes.
That's so exciting. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness.
And just think of it, our listeners too, I challenge you, think about, where can you invite someone to have a seat at your table, whether it's a literal seat at your table or, or not, but like, how can you invite these people into your spaces and places, to have a seat, to have a voice, to have an idea and representation. So Thom, you had shared with me, well, we both are avid hikers, maybe not avid, but we enjoy hiking. We don't necessarily enjoy skiing. So I hope, we can sit down and have a coffee or something stronger over the summer when I'm up in Park City. But for our listeners, yeah, let's do that. Our listeners that want to learn more about you as well as the dance company, where do we go? How do we find more information?
Oh, it's a great question. So our website for the company is Ririe-Woodbury.com, and that's RIRIEWOODBURY.com. And there's all this great information about the communities the company serves, work for the upcoming season. I think will be probably up by the time this premieres in the summer. So please go and check out where we're performing, and where in the country we're performing. And then, for me, I'm such a social media zombie. Sometimes I love Instagram. So you can always add me at just Thom_Dancy, and you're going to see a lot of photos of my hiking and camping adventures and of my dog. And so that's where you can
dog.
Yeah.
What kind of dog?
She's a 4-year-old border collie. She's asleep by me right now doing the dog thing, but I love it so much.
Dog thing. Yeah. Well, thank you. Final question. Is there a takeaway, final sage advice that you want to leave our listeners with today?
Oh gosh. Oh, sage advice. That is such a good question. I mean, I feel like, we're talking a lot about collaboration, and we're talking a lot about all these facets of what makes up leadership. And I think in order to think collaboratively and creatively, maybe not being afraid of risk. I think we're all a little bit scared of that, right? We stick our neck out and something fails, but the truth is that failure happens whether you stick your neck out or you don't. And so maybe the importance of thinking through like we've been talking about, these relationships, thinking collaboratively and creatively, and then just not being afraid to seize an opportunity or go that distance, because sometimes the results are happy and surprising and awesome. So I think that's my takeaway for today.
I love that. And what I hear is embrace risk, embrace failure, because that could have, you know, a positive outcome as well. So Thom Dancy, I can't wait. I might have to exchange that coffee for some time on the hiking trail. So either way, we've got to connect.
I love that. And thank you so much, Jarrett, for having me today. This has been a real pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us.